has a role that's positioned between those who own an organization and those who operate it, in the same way as, say, a chain of command might look. So it's a link in that chain. And because it's a link in the chain, it's accountable for everything that's below it and accountable to everything that's above it. And being able to fulfill that accountability is the challenge then that calls for a well-reasoned, conceptually coherent paradigm of governance. And when I'm saying a paradigm, why I'm pushing that issue here, is that, as Miriam said, the board in policy governance focuses very heavily on the organizational outcomes as opposed to the organizational busyness. But at the same time, the board is answering a lot of other questions. For example, how do we evaluate our chief executive officer? How do we, what principles can we use with committees that would keep them from becoming, in some cases, the tails that wag the dog, or keep them from interfering with clean delegation to our staff? How do we relate to community or to our community? What is the nature of that relationship? So there are a lot of questions like that that are independent questions. But for governance to be everything it can be, they need to be answered as part of an integrated whole. The model gives the board that integrated whole to attach all those things to. So all of those make sense as part of the total as opposed to individually.
For example, to enlarge on John's point about the board being positioned in a, as it were, chain of command between owners and operators, it's important to notice that gives the board an authoritative position. Many people view boards as having an advisory position, and there is indeed a good function for advisory bodies, but the board isn't an advisory body. It is an authoritative body, and so one of the questions that this paradigm has to answer is, in what way should the board use the authority? In what way would the board be actually abusing authority if it were to act this way or that way? So clarification about what is the nature of board authority and what is the most productive use of it is a really, really key issue that has to be addressed by a governance paradigm.
You know, when people talk about governance or get excited about it, well, actually they don't get excited about it very often. When they talk about it, when they get excited about it is when it goes very wrong. It's like an Enron or someplace like that. But so they don't really get interested in governance per se. They get interested in specific points about governance, like executive compensation is a hot one around the world right well, mostly the Western world right now, or a board that sits by and allows tremendously unethical things to happen with pension funds or with other things like that. People get excited about that. The model is an underlying paradigm, as I've said. But each one of those things we can understand them and have an insight into how to avoid them much better with the model than without. Executive compensation, for example, which is a big issue now because of the failure of boards, the failure of corporate boards to truly act on behalf of the owners and to be independent from management. And we still haven't gotten the idea, even though there are a lot of codes in the world that are supposed to address that. Boards are still more connected to management than they are to owners. And in fact, the heavy connection should be the other way around. The intimacy ought to be with owners, not with management. Boards in the United States and Canada have a great tendency to be chaired by the very person who supposedly works for the board. These are built-in inadequacies of governance that the policy governance model wouldn't allow to begin with. In other words, there are a lot of problems that come up the model would, in fact, have never allowed to come up to begin with.